There's an old saying that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, and that is eerily relevant for us in Canada these days, as for the first time since Confederation, the border between our two nations is closed due to contagion. Joining us now on the implications for now and going forward, we welcome in Rideau Lakes, Ontario, John Manley, the former Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Foreign Affairs for Canada, now a Senior Advisor at Bennett Jones. In Canada, Ontario, Sarah Goldfader, former diplomat at the U.S. Embassy in Canada, now a principal with the Earnscliffe Strategy Group. And in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Jim Diodati, the mayor of that beautiful but deeply concerned tourism mecca. It's great to welcome all of you to TVO tonight, and I want to just start by laying a few facts out here to set up our discussion. I'll ask our director to bring these numbers up, and away we go. Ontario borders, of course, 3 American states. That's Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Normally, more than 250,000 cross the Canada-U.S. border in a day. Today, of course, it's just open to essential trade and commerce, healthcare workers. No non-essential trips are allowed. About a third of Ontario's initial COVID-19 cases from January to the middle of April came from the United States, and that's higher than any other country. And of course, the U.S. population is 9 times larger than Canada's, but the U.S. is reporting 19 times more COVID-19 cases. Your Worship, let me start with you. This hits you where you live. The other day, Dr. Theresa Tam, the Chief Public Health Officer for the country, said the U.S. poses, quote, a risk to Canada. In your mind, how big is that risk?
Well, it's very big. I mean, we're really concerned. I mean, no different than if you live not too far away from Chernobyl, you'd be worried about what was happening there. And the fact that our numbers here are significantly lower and we're divided by this artificial boundary, the day the border opens up, we're really concerned. I mean, given the fact that New York State is just 25% larger than Ontario, but they've got 10 times the COVID-19 deaths, that's definitely alarming. And I think, Steve, in the same way that if we had a family member that was sick, we wouldn't go visit them and we wouldn't think they'd come to visit us until they were better. Of course, we'd want to see them when they're better. And we're hoping that's going to be the logic that we use on the borders as well.
Yeah, Sarah, the Premier of Ontario has put it this way. He said, look, we love you folks in the States, but we just don't want to see you right now. Do you think the Americans are a bigger risk to Canada than we are to them?
Well, and I don't think it's about nationality, right? It's the border is a easy gate that we can close, and it's harder to close the gate between places within the same country. So, Quebec made a decision to close its borders to people from Ontario and New Brunswick, and New Brunswick made a similar decision. And I think it's something that we have to consider when we look at any place where we have a natural gate where we can close. States right now, it's not about Americans being more risky than Canadians. It's about the free movement of people. And right now, we need to really consider whether or not movement is necessary.
John Manley, I guess I'm going to ask you to put your historic hat on because, of course, you were in government at 9/11 when the border was closed the last time in a significant way. And I wonder if you could do some comparing and contrasting from then to now.
Well, it was a very different situation. It seemed big at the time, but I've never seen anything like managing through a global pandemic. At the time, we were concerned about terrorism. You couldn't easily identify people who were threats or risks. And my concern for Canada at the time was that the border essentially shut down as the United States really put up its walls, and that included a lot of commercial and business traffic. So we saw the auto sector seriously impacted almost immediately, where just-in-time delivery patterns were important. So it became a question of how do we marshal our resources in order to ensure that Canada was not a risk to the United States from terrorism while keeping commercial enterprise going. Now you've got this really much more complex, hidden danger in COVID that may cross either way, and where the transmission is very difficult to stop. As Sarah said, at least you've got gates at the international border. It's not something that exists between communities or even between provinces or states in the United States. And it's a convenient way to restrain travel and thereby try to localize the incidence of the virus so that the treatments can occur. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to manage reopening those borders.
Well, we'll discuss that as our conversation continues. But, Your Worship, I wonder if I could get you just to sort of describe what you see on that border now. I know people who have gone into Niagara Falls in the past are accustomed to waiting sometimes a very long time to cross the border because the traffic has been so intense. What's it like now?
It's dead. I mean, it's very deserted. You're waiting, for something to happen and nothing's happening. The only traffic right now is, of course, commercial and essential travel. So I know there's a number of nurses and doctors that live here on the Canadian side that do travel and work at the American hospitals. There's some of that going on, and of course, a lot of trucks. Typically, we'll get 2 million trucks crossing our 4 bridges here every year, and it's a fraction of that. And typically, we'll get 10 million cars crossing our bridges here in Niagara. It's the most amount of cars anywhere in the country, and nowhere near that. The numbers, it looks deserted, and it's a real eerie feeling here in Niagara Falls where 98% of the people are unemployed right now in the tourist sector. Everything's closed. All the attractions, the casinos, the Ferris wheel, Clifton Hill, everything is shut right down. Unprecedented. It's a very eerie feeling, but I mean, it's what we have to do at this point.
Sarah, can I get you to weigh in on this issue of do we infer because essential traffic is still getting across the border? Presumably that means trucks for trade and commerce are still happening. Do we infer that there has been little to no impact on the two-way trade between our two countries as a result?
I don't think so. I think there's been a significant impact on trade. And even though both countries have worked hard to keep the border open for commerce and trade and for essential workers, the reality is that all of this comes at a cost to both countries. Trade is going to be more expensive. Right now we have to look at some of those truck drivers and other essential workers, needing top-offs in order to continue to put their families' lives at risk, essentially, every time they go out and they do the work that they need to do. So I think what we'll see is a slowdown. I think we've already seen it in large part. And the other part of this is both Canada and the United States looking to keep resources close to home, which makes a lot of sense right now. So trade is going to be more expensive. The goods that we buy in the grocery store, we've already seen it. I think most Canadians have noticed that grocery prices have increased in this period of time. And I think we should expect a lot of that especially as we move into the fall and winter when the Canadian crops are not as viable as they are right now in the summer.
John Manley, how much pressure do you think there is on Prime Minister Trudeau and his advisors right now from the U.S. to get that border thinner as opposed to thicker?
I don't think that government pressure is the thing that is weighing on the Prime Minister right now. I think it's more likely that what's weighing on him is the realization of two realizations. One, as we've seen recently, it's summer. And when summer comes to Canada, people don't stay indoors anymore. We have long winters, and getting people to stay behind the physical distancing parameters is going to be increasingly difficult. The other thing that's weighing on him is the realization that the sustainability of the government of Canada supporting, roughly 40% of the Canadian economy is in real doubt. Therefore, decisions are going to have to be made about opening up, and they are going to be among the most difficult decisions that a political leader has had to make outside of wartime, because the trade-off is going to be between relaxing the economic rules at the cost of human health and possibly life.
Sarah, where do you suppose the whole Canada-U.S. border issue and two-way trade and all of that, where do you suppose that is on President Donald Trump's list of priorities at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's very high. I think it is something that he considers carefully. He hears from the Canadian government quite a bit, and it is the longest unprotected border that clearly the United States has, but also in the world. And so I think there is a lot of thought going into the porousness of it and what to do about the integrated trade and supply chains that cross it and the southern border. And so while I think that the border in itself may thing that many of his advisors are considering, I think for the president in an election year, it's probably not at the top of his list.
Jim Didaddy, how much contact are you having right now with other border mayors in the province of Ontario?
Quite a bit. I speak regularly with Mayor Dilkins in Windsor, and of course, Mayor Redekop in Fort Erie, Mayor DeCero in Niagara-on-the-Lake. We stay in touch, and as well, Steve, I stay in touch with the mayors on the other side of the border as well, Mayor Brown in Buffalo and Mayor Ristano in Niagara Falls, New York, and a number of other mayors. And we do talk fairly regularly, as well as our partners at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut and as well in Las Vegas. So we do talk about how we're planning to get to the new normal and how we're going to safely be able to open things up eventually, because eventually we'll have to. It won't be sustainable. So how do we do it in the safest way? And I can tell you right now, our tourism ministry is working on a number of strategies. Matter of fact, Minister McLeod, provincial tourism minister, said we were the first tourist destination, to come out with a full recovery plan. We branded it. It's, Steve, it's going to be called safetoplay.ca and safetostay.ca. And we've got a whole bunch of really interesting, innovative ways that we can pivot and try to make it as safe as possible for the workers and for the visitors when we eventually open up.
And let me do a quick follow-up. Where, in your conversations with those other municipal leaders, what are they telling you about how they have been able to deal with the American administration vis-a-vis all these issues?
Well, like Sarah mentioned, we've got the longest unmilitarized border, 200 years of peace, strong relations here in Niagara Falls. A lot of people don't realize when they travel, there are two Niagara Falls. There's Niagara Falls, New York, and Niagara Falls, Ontario. And we see it as one city divided by a river. And I can tell you, Mayor Ristano and his former colleagues, we work very closely together because we know part of our brand. We like to think of Niagara Falls as the big brand and the goose that lays the golden eggs. And anything that's good for the brand is good for both of us. And conversely, anything negative that happens isn't good. So we talk regularly, and we're working on a lot of initiatives together. And I can tell you, we've got family here living on the border. We grew up crossing the border to go shopping, to eat, to visit our family. We have relatives on both sides. We work on both sides. It wasn't since 9/11 that you actually had to carry ID. So times have changed, but we're very closely aligned and we speak on a regular basis.
John Manley, I wonder if I could sort of get you to tap into your memories as Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, where, of course, the whole relationship with Washington would have been, if not job one, then, well, I don't know what would be at that time. Yeah, I can imagine. Could you give some advice to not only our local municipal leaders, but even our provincial and federal leaders right now about how they ought to handle that Canadian-American relationship right now?
Well, it is a relationship, and it's all about relationships. I mean, what I told our cabinet back in 2001 was, if you don't know your U.S. counterpart today, then you get to know them, and you've got a new best friend, whether they like it or not, because it's in having conversations, it's in meeting, it's in making sure that there are open lines of communication that we resolve issues. In my case, President Bush appointed Governor Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania as his White House advisor and later the first Secretary of Homeland Security. And he became my best friend. He's still my friend, in fact. And we built that kind of relationship. So what the mayor is doing with his counterparts, this is vitally important because everything is not president to prime minister. It's a relationship that has to function at every level, all the way down, business to business, municipality to municipality, province to state, federal departments to federal departments. It's vitally important to maintain those relationships.
Sarah, I'm genuinely, this is not a gotcha question. I am not inviting you to take a poke at any ambassador. I'm not, there's no mischief behind this question. It's just a generally, it really is a neutral, open-ended question. But I do note that we have an ambassador to the United States right now that is pretty new on the job and is not a political appointee in the sense that, you know, it's not a former prime minister's finance minister or chief of staff or, you know, nephew or anything like that. Uh, and I wonder if is that an issue at this time where, as Mr. Manley's just indicated, we need best friends down there?
Well, Kristen Hillman is an extraordinary individual, and she's been working on the Canada-U.S. relationship for a long time. I am not at all worried about Canada suffering at all for the lack of having a political appointed ambassador in Washington. I think it was an excellent choice. She's a stabilizing force there. She worked closely with David McNaughton when he was ambassador, and I think she's just fine. I do think that there is something to be noted in that the United States does not have an ambassador to Canada, and that may be a larger threat to the relationship if there is one. I would say, like, what John said about the relationships, I think is really important. And I think one of the really critical pieces right now is that the United States is so focused internally, and at getting the bandwidth from all of these counterparts in the United States is really tricky for Trudeau's cabinet, as well as they're trying to manage the situation in Canada. So unlike 9/11, which was a global response to something that happened in the United States, I think that because is global and we're all trying to figure out what we're each doing in our own separate countries, that interaction between governments has gotten stickier, has gotten harder to manage. And I think that is something that I would worry about in the weeks to come.
Stickier, but does it necessarily mean that their country and our country are not on the same page as it comes to reopening the border?
I don't know that we are, and I can't really speak to whether we are or not. I do think that there is a lot of concern in Canada and a lot of discomfort in Canada for reopening the border to the United States, where in the United States you see in a lot of the northern communities that, frankly, it's only been the cities on the north that have been hit particularly hard until recently. And now there is a big disconnect in the U.S. as to the regionalism of the pandemic. And so how Americans feel about the pandemic and going into other countries and traveling around the United States and North America in general, I think is much different than how Canadians feel right now.
Well, okay, let me do a follow-up with John Manley on that. And again, I'm going to ask this question sort of delicately. Let's just say the President of the United States is not quite a stickler on protocols in the way that others are during the course of this pandemic. If, therefore, President Trump called up Justin Trudeau one day and said, I want that border open right now, what recourse or what options do you think Canada would have under those circumstances if we thought we weren't ready to do it?
Prime Minister Trudeau has demonstrated remarkable dexterity, shall we say, in dealing with a president of the United States who is volatile, unpredictable, and uncharacteristically belligerent sometimes, even with his diplomatic friends. So I have confidence that he would find a way to probably manage that as well, and we would be looking at what protocols we would put in place in order to manage a more open border. So I would bet that in Ottawa, as we speak, people are thinking through just exactly that. Do we have temperature checking at the border? Do we do some kind of tracking of U.S. residents who come into Canada were the borders are open? There may be multiple ways to open the border, so to speak, without having it completely wide open. So my guess is that that's what would be going on. But I still don't think, Steve, that this is very high on the president's list. I think he's more interested in seeing some of his swing states being wide open, and he seems to be far more interested in attacking the governor of Michigan than he is in picking on Justin Trudeau these days.
No, fair enough. But Jim Diodati, let me follow up with you on that. If, for example, you discovered in conversations with your American counterparts that they wanted the border open sooner than you or Canadian officials thought made sense. What, if anything, could you do about that?
Well, not a lot. Politically, of course, we can apply pressure, and I echo John's comments. You know, with a mercurial president, it makes things definitely difficult. And speaking with my counterparts on the other side of the river, they don't want to upset the president either, because no one needs any more targets on their backs. And we're always conscious of the fact that, especially here in Niagara Falls, we're Canada's number one leisure destination. 25% of our guests come from the U.S. and 40% of them from New York State. We know that eventually we'll get back. Hopefully, it's going to be more the dimmer switch approach, like John said. So it's not going to be fast, and we need to invoke border technologies. There's some great innovative things that can be done. John referenced to some as well, and we're having those same discussions. So we're sensitive to the fact they're our number one trading partner, and we're their number one trading partner. But given the situation, we want to make sure we're gently tiptoeing through it, because we know eventually we want to be working together again. So we're sensitive to everything. And as Sarah pointed out earlier, 200 years of peace, this will be a blip on the screen. I think long term, I think it's like a little family squabble. I think we'll be fine eventually. But I'd say calm minds on both sides of the border are thinking about this the same way.
In which case, let's start to consider what some of the economic implications are of a border that doesn't get reopened anytime soon. And John Manley, I do want to understand the implications of this, because if we don't think things are going to go back to normal until there's a vaccine, who knows? I mean, are we talking 12 months? Are we talking 24 months? We don't know when that's going to happen yet. In the meantime, what do you suspect the economic ramifications between our two countries are going to be until whenever that new normal comes into place?
Well, the biggest worry I have is in those sectors that the mayor talks about and that are most important to him. That is the service sector, in hospitality and in retail. I think the commercial supply chains will more or less reestablish. We're seeing manufacturing reopening on both sides of the border, with certain protocols around distancing, wearing masks, and so on, enabling industry to reopen. And that used to be really important. In Canada today, industry is still important. It's an important part of our GDP, but it's not the massive jobs that are now in the services sector, many of which low paying or relatively low paying, maybe entry level, often in hospitality, restaurants, hotels, motels, and attractions, in retail, commercial operations. These are going to be the ones that are going to take time to reopen. And for them, for Niagara Falls, for example, it's going to mean that the border has to open to non-essential travel, to tourism, to people coming in just to pass a few days in a pleasant environment. And that's going to be true coast to coast in Canada. In those sectors. So much of our tourism dollars come in from the U.S. So that's the big worry that I've got, Steve.
Sarah, we have been going, our two governments respectively have been going sort of month by month, seeing where we are, and then so far always deciding, yes, we're going to keep the border closed to non-essential traffic for yet another period of time, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. Right. Have you got any guess as to when you think the border could get thinner, how much longer that will take?
I wouldn't be surprised to see it getting slowly thinner over time. The dimmer switch, I like that analogy a lot, that just came up. I think that there are a number of issues that I think will have to be addressed before we ever open the border back to what it used to be. And one of those key things will be, why are people coming into the country? Where are they staying? How long are they going to be here? Who are they seeing? And until we've resolved some of that within our own cities, I don't think that we can resolve that at the border. So you may see an increased amount of day trips being allowed, or some level of very discreet travel where we know our families are intertwined on both sides of the border, where you may be able to travel to see family. But I think it'll be a very slow process to go from where we're at today to the full open border that we back in February.
Can you imagine a set of circumstances, though, Sarah, where not only will you have to show a passport to cross that border, but you're also going to
Right.
have some kind of document indicating, yes, I have had a vaccine shot and I am safe to enter the other country?
So it's tricky with these two countries because we're two countries that believe strongly in individual privacy rights, and our health codes have been created to provide a great deal of privacy concern for all of our health information. And so a lot of these things that we're talking about right now and people having to demonstrate, it may have, demonstrate whether or not they've had the illness or an immunity passport, that may work out fine in countries that don't have the kind of, the charter rights that we have in Canada or the Bill of Rights that we have in the United States. But I think that's going to be very hard to do. That said, the only place that you can do that conceivably is the border. The border has its own sets of laws and regulations because you're basically asking for entrance, not instance. And so that may be the one place they're able to do this. But I think overall, both the United States and Canada have a lot of reckoning to do with our own privacy constraints and our thoughts about the privacy of our health records and the privacy of our personal travel that will have to be reckoned with before we truly open the border and ask for that kind of information in any systemic way.
Mayor Diodati, what do you need to see before you think the border can get back to whatever the new normal ends up being?
Well, resilience is part of our DNA. And as I mentioned about innovative border technologies, we're okay for that, with that rather, because we know that we will pivot as we always do. And I just look back to 9/11. At that time, we were really concerned because most Americans did not have passports. I think it was less than 5%. And today that number is more like 50%. And at that time, people said, we're never going to recover. We've got 40,000 jobs here in Niagara dependent on tourism to put food on the table. And we thought, how are we ever going to recover? Well, we've just bounced off of the last 5 years being 5 of the best years we've had in tourism. So I know we'll pivot. We just need to decide what that's going to look like and then slowly open it up. And at the same time, in the meantime, I believe since Americans won't be able to come and there won't be much international travel, we're going to have more rubber tire travel within Ontario and Canada. Given the fact that oil is so cheap, gas is so cheap, I think there'll be more staycations and there'll be more people that used to cross the border that'll make a decision. I think we're going to stay in Canada this summer.
I don't know. This is probably unfair to ask you. You probably don't have the stats off the top of your fingers, but do you have a sense about, in normal times, what percentage of people coming to Niagara Falls are from the province of Ontario or from within an hour's drive as opposed to have come over the border?
Yeah, more than 50% come from within Ontario. So really, this has always been our number one supplier of tourism, and especially the GTA. When people want to get out of Dodge, they come to Niagara, and Niagara Falls specifically, Niagara Lake. We've got 130 wineries. We've got 30 golf courses. I always joke, Steve, I say, we offer a buffet of fun and excitement. There's something here for everyone.
And I forget now, I've lost count. How many wonders of the world are there? Are there 8? You've surely got one of them, that's for sure.
Well, you know what? And I've traveled, I've been many places. I've never met anyone anywhere in the world that doesn't know Niagara Falls. I like to joke, it's kind of like the Coca-Cola of municipalities. It's got that strong brand recognition. As soon as you say Niagara Falls, they smile instantly. And I don't care if it's in the foothills of China or in the countryside of India, they all know it. And it's important. And I think it's part of how we market Canada. And it's important that we, again, protect the goose and make sure that when we open up the border, it's done in a safe and manageable way.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, with a minute to go here, let's ask about both Premier Doug Ford of Ontario and Donald Trump, the President of the United States, have both said they want their own jurisdiction's domestic manufacturing capacity to be greatly increased, wanting to rely a lot less on others for the things that we need going forward. What do you think the long-term implications are for two-way trade as a result of that kind of thinking?
Well, it is a kind of thinking that I think we're seeing on both sides of the border to great extent, especially as regards to medical supplies and PPE. But overall, there is a move towards an understanding of domestic capacity. And Canada, for a long time, has taken for granted that just because something is on the other side of the border, it's essentially here. And that's less and less true. And part of that's the Trump administration, part of that's the current pandemic. But I think that there does have to be some discussion about what an industrial strategy looks like for Canada in the the near future. We've heard of the Industrial Strategy Council and the Economic Strategy Tables, which are going to be rolled out in the next few months. And that's all part of this broader plan, I think, to bring things back into inside the borders of Canada, where, of course, globalization is important, redundancy in supply chain is important, so we'll continue to be a globalized trade. But at the same time, domestic capacity is something that is front of mind right now for Canadians.
I want to thank all three of you for spending so much time with us on TVO tonight, and I know I speak for everybody when I say we can't wait to get back to Niagara Falls and see those glorious waters streaming down into the Niagara River. I got a thumbs up from the mayor on that one. Take care, everybody, and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.